The security footage would later show that Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart past the Project Phantom laboratory at exactly 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night in October. What the cameras couldn't capture was the way her eyes lingered on the massive drone prototype suspended in the center of the sterile white room, its carbon fiber hull gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights like some mechanical predator frozen mid-hunt. $800 million of cutting-edge military technology, designed to be invisible to enemy radar, untraceable in the night sky, and deadly silent in operation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria paused her cart and adjusted her blue maintenance uniform, the fabric worn thin from countless washings. Through the reinforced glass, she could see the engineer's workstation scattered with technical drawings, computer screens displaying complex aerodynamic models and prototypes of sensor arrays that cost more than most people's houses. Tomorrow, these same engineers would arrive in their Tesla sedans and BMW coupes, armed with MIT degrees and Stanford credentials, ready to solve problems that had stumped them for months. But Maria Santos had already solved their biggest problem. 6 weeks ago, the solution was sitting in her converted garage workshop, built from salvaged aluminum, discarded electronics, and pure engineering genius that no amount of corporate funding could buy. The only issue was that nobody at Quantum Dynamics Corporation knew that their night janitor held a degree in aerospace engineering from the same MIT that their lead engineers loved to mention in every meeting. They were about to find out in the most spectacular way possible. Maria Santos had perfected the art of invisibility long before she ever thought about building stealth aircraft. At 42, she moved through the corridors of Quantum Dynamics Corporation like smoke, her cleaning cartwheels gliding silently across polished floors, her presence so routine that the security guards barely registered her passing. The night shift suited her perfectly, providing access to spaces and conversations that revealed more about the company's struggles than any board meeting ever could. It had been 18 months since Lockheed Martin had eliminated her position during their latest round of cost-cutting measures. 18 months of rejection letters, overqualified stamps on job applications, and the slow erosion of savings accounts. When Frank Chun, head of maintenance at Quantum Dynamics, offered her the janitor position, Maria's pride had wrestled with necessity. Necessity won, as it always does when the mortgage payments start piling up. Her shift began each evening at 6 o'clock sharp, just as the day engineers were packing up their laptops and heading to happy hour at the trendy bars downtown. Maria would watch them through the break room window, clustered around Jake Morrison like planets orbiting a star. At 28, Jake possessed the kind of confident swagger that came from never having experienced real failure. His Stanford engineering degree hung prominently in his office, positioned so visitors couldn't miss it during meetings. His latest Tesla Model S gleamed in the reserved parking spot closest to the building entrance, a chrome declaration of success. The other engineers clearly worshipped him. Lisa Rodriguez, fresh out of Georgia Tech, hung on his every word during technical discussions. David Park, the senior VP, had fast-tracked Jake's career after his innovative work on autonomous flight systems. Even Dr. Elena Vasquez, the program director known for her ice-cold perfectionism, seemed to soften when Jake presented his ideas with theatrical flair and polished PowerPoint presentations. Maria understood the appeal. Jake Morrison was everything the tech industry celebrated: young, brilliant, photogenic, and utterly convinced of his own genius. His approach to the Project Phantom stealth drone embodied Silicon Valley's philosophy that every problem could be solved by throwing enough money and cutting-edge technology at it. Carbon fiber composites imported from Japan, artificial intelligence systems that cost more than small aircraft, and sensor arrays so sophisticated they required their own cooling systems. But Maria also saw what the others missed during her silent rounds through the facility. She noticed the stress lines deepening around Jake's eyes as deadline after deadline slipped past. She observed the increasingly frantic late-night sessions where engineers clustered around computer screens, running simulation after simulation that failed to solve fundamental design flaws. Most telling of all, she read the technical reports, left carelessly on desks, documents that revealed Project Phantom's dirty secret. The drone was too heavy, too complex, and too expensive to ever work as intended. The Pentagon contract was worth $800 million, with the potential for follow-up orders that could transform quantum dynamics from a mid-tier defense contractor into an industry giant. The pressure was enormous, and it showed in every stressed conversation Maria overheard while emptying trash cans and wiping down whiteboards, covered in increasingly desperate calculations. Maria's own workspace was a converted storage room in the basement of Building C7, sandwiched between the industrial laundry facility and the backup generator systems. Frank Chun had apologized when showing her the cramped space, explaining that budget constraints meant support staff had to make do with whatever was available. Maria had smiled and thanked him, not mentioning that she preferred the isolation. The basement gave her access to building schematics, maintenance records, and most importantly, the industrial waste stream that revealed exactly what materials the engineers were burning through in their quest for perfection. Her home workshop told a different story entirely. The garage behind her modest rental house in East Austin had been transformed into something that would have impressed even the most experienced aircraft mechanic. Workbenches lined the walls, supporting an eclectic collection of tools accumulated over 15 years in aerospace engineering. Computer monitors displayed CAD software that she'd purchased with her own money, running on hardware assembled from components that quantum dynamics had discarded as obsolete. The centerpiece of her workshop was a drone that existed because of everything Project Phantom was not. Where Jake's team pursued complexity, Maria had embraced elegant simplicity. Where they demanded exotic materials, she had innovated with clever applications of ordinary components. Where they burned millions of dollars, she had achieved superior performance with a budget that wouldn't cover one of their weekly catering bills. Maria called her creation the Shadowhawk, though she'd never spoken the name aloud to another human being. Built from aluminum salvaged from aircraft maintenance yards, powered by modified commercial drone components, and guided by software she'd written herself during countless sleepless nights, the Shadowhawk represented everything she'd learned about making the impossible work with available resources. The design philosophy was pure Maria Santos, maximum effectiveness with minimum complexity. Instead of Jake's elaborate AI systems, she used simplified algorithms that were more reliable and harder to hack. Instead of exotic stealth materials, she employed geometric design principles that bent radar waves away from receivers. Instead of expensive sensor arrays, she integrated commercial cameras and microphones in ways that actually provided superior reconnaissance capabilities. But the true genius of the Shadowhawk lay in its adaptive design. Maria had created a drone that learned from its environment, adjusting its flight patterns and stealth characteristics based on real-time conditions. Jake's team was building a sophisticated hammer. Maria had built a Swiss Army knife that could become whatever the mission required. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd accomplished this breakthrough while earning $11 an hour to empty the trash cans of engineers who couldn't solve problems she'd already mastered. Every night, she walked past their workstations and saw the same fundamental errors repeated with expensive precision. Their approach was like trying to build a race car by adding more engines instead of reducing weight and improving aerodynamics. Maria had tried the proper channels once, 3 months into her janitor position. She'd carefully prepared a technical proposal outlining more efficient approaches to the stealth challenges, submitted it through the company's innovation portal, and waited for a response. The rejection came back within 48 hours. Thank you for your interest in contributing to quantum dynamics mission. However, proposals for technical modifications to classified projects must come from personnel with appropriate security clearances and relevant expertise. The message was clear. Janitors weren't supposed to have ideas above their station. That rejection had stung, but it had also clarified Maria's path forward. If the official channels were closed to her, she'd prove her concepts through demonstration. The Shadowhawk project became her evening obsession, a mechanical rebellion against a system that measured worth by job titles and parking spot assignments, rather than actual capability. Working in the basement of Building C7 provided unexpected advantages. The building's older sections contained abandoned laboratories and storage, areas that most employees had forgotten existed. Maria discovered maintenance tunnels that connected different sections of the facility, emergency exits that weren't monitored by security cameras, and most valuable of all, access to the same computer networks that the engineers used for their classified work. Not that Maria was engaging in corporate espionage. She had no interest in stealing proprietary information or selling secrets to competitors. But understanding Project Phantom's specific weaknesses allowed her to design solutions that addressed real problems rather than theoretical challenges. When she observed Jake's team struggling with thermal signature management, she incorporated heat dissipation improvements into the Shadowhawk's design. When she noticed their control systems failing during adverse weather testing, she developed more robust communication protocols. The night shift also gave Maria access to conversations that revealed the human dynamics underlying quantum dynamics technical struggles. She learned that Jake Morrison's confidence masked growing desperation as his timeline slipped and his budget exploded. She overheard David Park's increasingly heated phone calls with Pentagon officials demanding progress reports. Most revealing of all, she witnessed Dr. Elena Vasquez's private moments of doubt when she thought nobody was watching. Dr. Vasquez was a fascinating study in corporate leadership under pressure. During the day, she projected unwavering confidence in Project Phantom's eventual success. But late at night, when she thought the building was empty except for security guards, Maria had observed her sitting alone in her office, staring at technical reports with the expression of someone watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. Dr. Vasquez understood the physics well enough to recognize the fundamental flaws in Jake's approach, but the political and financial pressures made changing course nearly impossible. The corporate culture at Quantum Dynamics exemplified everything wrong with modern defense contracting. Success was measured by the ability to generate impressive presentations and secure additional funding rather than actual technical achievement. Jake Morrison had mastered this game perfectly, spinning each setback as a learning opportunity and each delay as evidence of the project's ambitious scope. His quarterly reviews with Pentagon officials were theatrical performances that would have impressed Broadway audiences. Maria watched these presentations from the cleaning closet adjacent to the main conference room, her mop bucket providing perfect cover while she observed the disconnect between promise and reality. Jake would display beautiful computer simulations of the Project Phantom drone, performing impossible maneuvers, while carefully avoiding mention of the fact that the actual prototype couldn't maintain stable flight for more than 15 minutes without overheating. The engineers working under Jake weren't stupid or incompetent. Lisa Rodriguez showed genuine brilliance in her approach to sensor integration, and several team members had developed innovative solutions to specific technical challenges. But they were trapped within a framework that prioritized complexity over effectiveness, expense over efficiency, and theoretical perfection over practical functionality. Maria's approach represented the antithesis of everything quantum dynamics celebrated. She worked alone rather than in teams, used inexpensive materials rather than exotic composites, and focused on what worked rather than what impressed investors. The Shadow Hawk project violated every principle of modern corporate engineering, which was precisely why it succeeded where Project Phantom continued to fail. The breakthrough moment came during her 6th month as a janitor while cleaning the Advanced Materials Laboratory after a particularly frustrating day for Jake's team. The engineers had been testing a new carbon fiber composite that promised improved stealth characteristics but proved too brittle for practical use. Maria found herself staring at the failed test samples in the trash bin, recognizing immediately why the material had disappointed them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The problem wasn't with the carbon fiber itself, but with how they were trying to use it. Jake's team was applying cutting-edge materials to conventional design approaches, like putting racing tires on a farm tractor and expecting Formula One performance. Maria realized that her simplified aluminum construction, combined with the right geometric principles, could achieve superior stealth characteristics at a fraction of the cost and complexity. That night, she redesigned the Shadow Hawk's entire airframe, incorporating lessons learned from Jake's expensive failures. The result was a drone that looked deceptively simple, but embodied sophisticated engineering principles that the official project team had overlooked in their pursuit of technological complexity. By month 8 of her janitor tenure, the Shadow Hawk was ready for its first test flight. Maria had identified a perfect location 15 miles outside Austin, an abandoned airfield that provided adequate space for testing, while remaining far from commercial flight paths and military installations. The drone performed flawlessly, exceeding her most optimistic projections for speed, maneuverability, and stealth characteristics. More importantly, the Shadow Hawk demonstrated capabilities that Project Phantom's designers had declared impossible. It could maintain silent operation while carrying significant sensor payloads, adapt its flight patterns in real time to avoid detection, and operate continuously for over 6 hours without maintenance or refueling. All of this using technology that cost less than 1% of Jake's budget. Maria documented every test flight meticulously, building a comprehensive database of performance metrics that would have impressed any Pentagon evaluation team. But she also understood that data alone wouldn't be sufficient to challenge the established order at quantum dynamics. She needed an opportunity to demonstrate the Shadow Hawk's capabilities in a context that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. That opportunity was approaching faster than she'd anticipated. Through conversations overheard during her cleaning rounds, Maria learned that General Robert Hayes would be visiting quantum dynamics within the month for a critical evaluation of Project Phantom's progress. The Pentagon was growing impatient, with delays and cost overruns, and this visit would likely determine whether the contract continued or got transferred to a competitor. Jake Morrison was desperately preparing for the demonstration, working 18-hour days to address the drone's most obvious flaws. But Maria could see from the technical reports left on his desk that the fundamental problems remained unsolved. Project Phantom was too heavy to achieve its performance targets, too complex to operate reliably, and too expensive to manufacture in meaningful quantities. The official demonstration would be a carefully choreographed performance, designed to highlight the drone's strengths while concealing its weaknesses. Jake had become expert at these presentations, using controlled conditions and selective data to create impressive illusions of capability. But illusions couldn't hide the truth forever, and Maria suspected that General Hayes possessed enough technical expertise to see through the smoke and mirrors. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the corridors of Building C7 each night, Maria found herself contemplating a decision that would change everything. She possessed the solution to problems that had stumped some of the brightest minds in aerospace engineering. Her garage workshop contained a functioning stealth drone that outperformed anything quantum dynamics had produced despite its $800 million budget. The question was whether she had the courage to step out of the shadows and prove That sometimes the most profound innovations come from the most unexpected places. The woman they saw as just another invisible service worker was about to demonstrate that genius recognizes no uniform, acknowledges no hierarchy, and often resides in the last place anyone thinks to look. But first, she needed to survive being the quiet observer who everyone had already decided didn't matter. The cleaning lady with calloused hands and a maintenance uniform was about to remind the world that innovation belongs to those bold enough to attempt the impossible, regardless of whether anyone believes they deserve the chance. Maria Santos emptied the trash bin in Jake Morrison's office for the last time as an invisible janitor. Tomorrow, everything would change. The question was whether Quantum Dynamics Corporation was ready to discover that their most valuable asset had been hiding in plain sight, wearing a blue maintenance uniform and pushing a cart that everyone was trained to overlook. In her garage workshop, the Shadow Hawk waited silently on its test stand, 37 pounds of aluminum and electronics that represented the future of stealth reconnaissance. A future built not in gleaming corporate laboratories, but in the cluttered workspace of a woman who refused to let other people's limitations define her own possibilities. The demonstration that would shake the foundations of the defense industry was just days away. But first, Maria had to find the courage to step into the light and claim her place among the engineers who had never imagined that brilliance could wear a janitor's uniform. The rejection email arrived on a Thursday morning at 9:47 a.m., 3 weeks after Maria had submitted her technical proposal through Quantum Dynamics' official innovation portal. She read it while sitting in her beat-up Honda Civic in the employee parking lot, having arrived early for her shift to check her messages. Before the building filled with day staff who might question why the night janitor was using company computers. After careful review by our technical evaluation committee, we have determined that your submission does not align with current project requirements. We appreciate your interest in contributing to Quantum Dynamics' mission, but proposals for modifications to classified defense projects must originate from personnel with appropriate security clearances and documented expertise in relevant fields. We encourage you to focus on excellence in your current role while our engineering teams handle technical development. The email was signed by Dr. Elena Vasquez, though Maria suspected it had been written by some human resources functionary who specialized in politely crushing dreams. The message was professionally worded and utterly devastating in its casual dismissal. Not only had they rejected her ideas, they'd made it clear that someone in her position had no business having ideas in the first place. Maria stared at the screen for several minutes, feeling the familiar sting of being reduced to her job title rather than evaluated on her capabilities. The proposal she'd submitted wasn't some half-baked suggestion from an unqualified observer. She'd spent 47 hours preparing a comprehensive analysis of Project Phantom's thermal signature problems, complete with mathematical models, materials analysis, and cost projections that could have saved the program millions of dollars and months of development time. But none of that mattered because the person presenting the solution wore a maintenance uniform instead of an engineering badge. She deleted the email and walked into Building C7 through the service entrance, nodding to the security guard who barely glanced up from his newspaper. Frank Chun was waiting by the maintenance office with her assignment sheet for the day, his weathered face creased with the kind of smile that suggested he enjoyed working with people who actually got things done. "Morning, Maria," he said, handing her the clipboard. "Got some extra work today. Conference room 3 needs deep cleaning after yesterday's presentation disaster. Apparently, someone spilled coffee all over the prototype display boards." Maria accepted the assignment without comment, but she knew exactly what had happened in Conference Room 3. She'd observed the aftermath through security monitors while Jake Morrison had one of his increasingly common meltdowns over Project Phantom's latest setback. The coffee incident had occurred when Jake slammed his mug down in frustration after Dr. Vasquez, questioned his timeline projections for the third consecutive meeting. The conference room told the story of a project spiraling toward failure despite enormous financial resources and corporate support. Whiteboards covered with equations that led nowhere. Prototype components scattered across tables like the remnants of expensive experiments. And presentation materials that promised capabilities the actual hardware couldn't deliver. Maria methodically cleaned coffee stains from technical drawings while mentally cataloging the fundamental errors that kept repeating themselves in different forms. Jake's approach to stealth technology was emblematic of everything wrong with modern defense contracting. Instead of understanding the physics principles that made objects invisible to radar, he was trying to achieve stealth through brute force application of expensive materials and complex systems. His team had spent 18 months developing radar-absorbing coatings that cost more than luxury automobiles, while ignoring the geometric design principles that could achieve superior results using ordinary aluminum. The irony was particularly bitter because Maria had already solved the problems that were driving Jake toward nervous exhaustion. Her garage workshop contained working prototypes that demonstrated effective solutions to challenges that quantum dynamics couldn't overcome despite unlimited access to cutting-edge technology and brilliant engineers. But the corporate hierarchy made it impossible for solutions to flow upward from unexpected sources. Maria finished cleaning the conference room and moved on to the Advanced Materials Laboratory, where she found Lisa Rodriguez working alone on a Saturday, surrounded by failed composite samples and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Lisa was one of the few engineers at Quantum Dynamics who showed genuine curiosity about practical problem solving rather than just impressive presentations, and Maria had developed a grudging respect for her methodical approach to technical challenges. Rough week? Maria asked while emptying the wastebaskets, keeping her tone conversational but not presumptuous. Lisa looked up from her computer screen with the glazed expression of someone who'd been staring at simulation results for too many consecutive hours. You could say that. We're having issues with structural integrity versus weight optimization. Every time we reduce mass to improve flight performance, we compromise durability. Every time we strengthen the airframe, we exceed weight limits for the mission profile. Maria nodded sympathetically while internally screaming with frustration. The solution was elegant and had been proven in her own prototypes. Instead of trying to optimize individual components, you optimize the entire system through intelligent design integration. But explaining this would require revealing knowledge that a janitor wasn't supposed to possess. Sounds complicated, Maria said. Instead, continuing her cleaning routine while Lisa returned to her futile attempts to solve problems using the wrong fundamental approach. This interaction exemplified Maria's daily torture at Quantum Dynamics. She was surrounded by intelligent people struggling with challenges she'd already mastered. But the corporate structure made meaningful communication impossible. She was expected to be invisible, silent, and grateful for the opportunity to clean up after people who earned 50 times her salary while consistently failing to achieve objectives she could have accomplished with a fraction of their resources. The psychological toll was becoming harder to ignore. Maria had spent 15 years in aerospace engineering, contributing to projects that put satellites into orbit and developed aircraft that pushed the boundaries of human flight capability. She'd been respected by colleagues, consulted on critical decisions, and valued for insights that saved programs millions of dollars through innovative problem solving. Now she was invisible, her expertise irrelevant, her contributions limited to ensuring that trash cans were empty and whiteboards were clean. But the financial reality remained unchanged. Health insurance, mortgage payments, and basic living expenses required steady income that engineering positions weren't providing in a market saturated with overqualified candidates competing for limited openings. The janitor position at Quantum Dynamics paid enough to keep her afloat while she continued searching for engineering work, and the night shift allowed her to maintain some dignity by avoiding too much contact with former colleagues who might recognize her. The breaking point came during her 4th month on the job, when she overheard a conversation that revealed just how completely the company leadership misunderstood their own technical challenges. Dr. Elena Vasquez was conducting a progress review with Jake Morrison and David Park, discussing the latest Pentagon evaluation of Project Phantom's development timeline. The general is asking pointed questions about our stealth effectiveness, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice carrying the tension of someone delivering bad news to people who didn't want to hear it. The preliminary tests show radar cross-section values that are marginally better than conventional aircraft, not the revolutionary improvement we promised. Jake's response was pure corporate deflection disguised as technical confidence. We're dealing with fundamental physics limitations that nobody in the industry has fully solved. Our approach is sound, but we need more time to refine the implementation. The materials science is pushing boundaries that require iterative development. Maria had to grip her mop handle to prevent herself from walking into the conference room and explaining exactly why their approach was fundamentally flawed. The physics limitations Jake mentioned didn't exist. The materials science problems had been solved decades ago, and the iterative development he was proposing would waste years pursuing solutions that could be achieved immediately using different design principles. But challenging Jake's assessment would require admitting that she'd been analyzing their classified technical data and developing alternative solutions, activities that would result in immediate termination and possible criminal charges. So, she remained silent, invisible, and increasingly angry about a system that valued credentials over capability and position over performance. The decision to build the Shadowhawk crystallized during that conversation. If quantum dynamics wouldn't accept solutions through official channels, Maria would develop those solutions independently and demonstrate their effectiveness through undeniable results. The Garage Workshop project evolved from a personal therapeutic activity into a systematic effort to prove that innovation could emerge from unexpected sources when given the opportunity to flourish. Working nights provided significant advantages for covert engineering development. The building was largely empty, except for security guards who followed predictable patrol patterns, giving Maria access to equipment and materials that would have been impossible to obtain during normal business hours. More importantly, the waste stream from Jake's expensive experiments provided a steady supply of components that had been discarded as inadequate, but were actually perfectly suitable for more intelligent applications. Maria's salvage operations were technically within the bounds of her maintenance duties. Quantum dynamics generated enormous quantities of electronic waste, prototype components, and materials that were routinely disposed of when projects changed direction or requirements evolved. As the person responsible for cleaning laboratories and disposing of trash, she had legitimate access to items that would have cost thousands of dollars to purchase through normal procurement channels. The ethical implications were more complex. Maria wasn't stealing proprietary information or selling company secrets to competitors, but she was definitely using her position to access resources and knowledge that weren't intended for personal projects. However, the complete dismissal of her official proposal had convinced her that conventional approaches would never succeed in an environment where janitors weren't supposed to have ideas above their station. The Shadowhawk project became her evening obsession, a mechanical rebellion against a system that measured worth by job titles rather than actual capability. Every component she installed, every line of code she wrote, and every test flight she conducted was a statement that innovation belonged to those bold enough to attempt the impossible, regardless of whether anyone believed they deserved the chance. Her basement workspace at Quantum Dynamics proved invaluable for research and development activities that required access to specialized equipment. The building's older sections contained abandoned laboratories with oscilloscopes, signal generators and computer terminals that weren't being monitored by the IT department. Maria discovered that her maintenance access card opened doors to forgotten storage areas where outdated but functional equipment was gathering dust instead of being productively utilized. The most valuable discovery was a network connection in the basement that provided access to the same technical databases that Jake's team used for their research. This wasn't hacking or unauthorized intrusion. The connection was available to any employee with valid credentials, but nobody expected a janitor to know how to use aerospace engineering software or understand the significance of classified performance specifications. Through this access, Maria gained detailed insight into Project Phantom's specific technical failures and Pentagon requirements. She learned that the military's real needs were much simpler than Jake's complicated solutions suggested. They wanted a reconnaissance drone that could operate undetected for extended periods, carry basic sensor payloads, and function reliably in adverse conditions without requiring extensive maintenance or specialized support equipment. Jake's team was developing a technological marvel that could theoretically outperform anything in existence, but couldn't reliably complete basic missions without breaking down or requiring expensive repairs. Their approach was like designing a Formula One race car for grocery shopping, sophisticated and impressive but fundamentally unsuited for practical applications. Maria's alternative philosophy emphasized reliability, simplicity, and effectiveness over technological complexity. The Shadowhawk incorporated commercially available components in innovative configurations that achieved superior performance through intelligent system integration rather than exotic materials or cutting-edge electronics. Every design decision prioritized functionality over impressiveness, cost-effectiveness over prestige, and real-world performance over laboratory perfection. The breakthrough came when she realized that quantum dynamics was trying to solve stealth challenges using the same conventional thinking that had created those challenges in the first place. Instead of making conventional aircraft invisible to radar, she designed an aircraft that fundamentally changed how radar waves interacted with flying objects. The geometric principles were based on research that had been published in academic journals for decades. But nobody at Quantum Dynamics had considered applying theoretical physics to practical engineering problems. Building the Shadowhawk required skills that Maria had developed over 15 years in aerospace engineering, but it also demanded resourcefulness that her corporate career had never tested. She learned to fabricate components using equipment borrowed from the building's maintenance workshop, write software using programming languages she taught herself during lunch breaks, and source materials from suppliers who didn't ask too many questions about unconventional projects. The financial investment was significant for someone earning a janitor's salary. Maria spent her entire savings account on components, tools, and materials that couldn't be salvaged from Quantum Dynamics' waste stream. She took on additional cleaning contracts during weekends to fund development activities that were consuming every available hour and dollar. The project became an all-consuming obsession that left little room for anything else in her life. But the psychological rewards were immense. After months of feeling invisible and irrelevant, Maria was finally engaged in work that utilized her capabilities and challenged her intellect. The Shadowhawk project reminded her why she'd fallen in love with engineering in the first place. The pure satisfaction of solving complex problems through creative application of scientific principles and practical ingenuity. The first successful test flight occurred on a cold December evening at the abandoned airfield outside Austin. Maria had spent weeks preparing for this moment, checking and rechecking every system, running simulation after simulation, and identifying potential failure modes that could turn triumph into disaster. When the Shadowhawk lifted smoothly into the darkening sky and executed perfect flight patterns while remaining completely invisible to her radar tracking equipment, she experienced a euphoria that almost justified months of exhaustion and financial sacrifice. More test flights followed, each one proving that her unconventional approach had succeeded where quantum dynamics continued to fail. The Shadowhawk demonstrated stealth characteristics that exceeded Project Phantom's theoretical targets, carried sensor payloads that provided superior reconnaissance capabilities, and operated continuously for hours without the maintenance issues that plagued Jake's prototype. All of this using technology that cost less than Jake's team spent on catered lunches during a typical month. But Maria also understood that technical success was only the beginning. Proving that her design worked was meaningless unless she could find a way to demonstrate those capabilities to people who mattered. The corporate hierarchy at Quantum Dynamics had already made clear that solutions from unexpected sources weren't welcome, regardless of their effectiveness. The challenge was finding an opportunity to showcase the Shadowhawk's capabilities in a context that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Maria needed a demonstration that would force the aerospace industry to acknowledge that innovation could emerge from the most unlikely places and that genius wore many different uniforms. That opportunity was approaching faster than she'd anticipated. Through conversations overheard during her cleaning rounds, Maria learned that Project Phantom was facing its most critical evaluation yet. General Robert Hayes would be visiting Quantum Dynamics within the month to assess progress and determine whether the Pentagon would continue funding a program that had already consumed enormous resources while delivering minimal results. Jake Morrison was desperately preparing for this demonstration, working around the clock to address the most obvious flaws in his design while hoping that impressive presentations could disguise fundamental technical failures. But Maria could see from the reports left on his desk that the core problems remained unsolved. Project Phantom was still too heavy, too complex, and too unreliable to meet its basic mission requirements. The official demonstration would be carefully choreographed to highlight theoretical capabilities while concealing practical limitations. Jake had become expert at these performances, using controlled conditions and selective data to create illusions of progress that satisfied bureaucrats who didn't understand the technical details. But General Hayes possessed enough engineering background to recognize the difference between genuine achievement and sophisticated smoke and mirrors. Maria found herself contemplating a decision that would change everything. She possessed working solutions to problems that had stumped some of the brightest minds in aerospace engineering, and she had the opportunity to demonstrate those solutions during the most important evaluation in Project Phantom's history. The question was whether she had the courage to step out of the shadows and prove that innovation recognized no hierarchy. The woman they saw as invisible was about to become impossible to ignore. But first, she needed to find a way to ensure that her moment of truth would be undeniable, unfiltered, and absolutely devastating to everyone who had dismissed her because of a maintenance uniform and an $11 hourly wage. In her garage workshop, the Shadowhawk waited silently on its launch platform, ready to demonstrate that the future of stealth technology had been hiding in the last place anyone thought to look. The only question was whether Maria Santos had the audacity to claim her place among the engineers who had never imagined that brilliance could wear a janitor's name tag. The basement levels of Quantum Dynamics Corporation held secrets that most employees never suspected existed. Maria discovered this during her third month on the maintenance crew, when a power outage forced her to navigate the building's lower levels using emergency lighting and building schematics that Frank Chun had reluctantly provided. What she found there would transform her from frustrated observer into methodical investigator. Sub-Basement 2 contained archives that dated back to the company's founding in 1987. File cabinets stuffed with technical reports from projects that had been classified beyond most employees' clearance levels. More importantly, it housed computer terminals that were connected to the main network, but weren't monitored by the IT security systems that tracked activity on standard workstations. These forgotten machines became Maria's window into the true scope of Quantum Dynamics' technical struggles. Her investigation began accidentally, while researching historical data about building ventilation systems that she needed to repair. The archive computers contained databases that stretched back decades, including performance records from previous drone development programs that revealed a disturbing pattern. Quantum dynamics had been repeating the same fundamental mistakes. For over 15 years, pursuing expensive complexity instead of elegant solutions, prioritizing impressive demonstrations over practical functionality. Project Phantom wasn't an isolated failure, but the latest iteration of a corporate philosophy that consistently produced technological marvels that couldn't perform basic missions reliably. The company had developed stealth aircraft that were too fragile for combat operations, reconnaissance drones that required constant maintenance, and autonomous systems that failed when faced with unexpected situations. Each program had consumed enormous resources while delivering minimal operational capability. But the archived reports also contained something else: documentation of alternative approaches that had been proposed by various engineers over the years, all rejected for the same reasons that Maria's own submission had been dismissed. Lower level employees who suggested simpler solutions were told to focus on their assigned responsibilities. Mid-level engineers who questioned fundamental assumptions were transferred to less critical projects. Senior staff who pushed too hard for practical alternatives found their contract renewals mysteriously delayed. The pattern was clear and depressing. Quantum dynamics had created a corporate culture that actively suppressed innovation in favor of maintaining established hierarchies and approaches. Technical excellence was less important than political conformity, and questioning approved methodologies was career suicide, regardless of how obviously flawed those methodologies might be. Maria compiled this historical data methodically, working late into the night shifts when she was certain that her computer activity wouldn't attract attention from security personnel. She developed spreadsheets tracking cost overruns, timeline failures, and performance shortfalls across multiple programs spanning decades. The numbers painted a picture of institutional dysfunction that would have shocked Pentagon officials if they'd been aware of the scope and consistency of the problems. More disturbing was the discovery that several brilliant engineers had left quantum dynamics over the years after becoming frustrated with their inability to implement obvious improvements to failing projects. Maria found resignation letters from MIT and Stanford graduates who had tried unsuccessfully to introduce innovations that could have saved millions of dollars and years of development time. Their departures had been quietly accepted rather than treated as warnings about systemic problems. The current Project Phantom team was unknowingly repeating mistakes that had been identified and documented by their predecessors multiple times. Jake Morrison's approach to stealth technology was virtually identical to failed attempts from 2019, 2015, and 2011, each time consuming enormous resources before being quietly abandoned when practical limitations became undeniable. The corporate amnesia was so complete that current engineers weren't even aware that their innovative solutions had been tried before. Maria's garage workshop became the beneficiary of this historical research. By understanding previous failures in detail, she could avoid repeating the same errors in her own design process. More importantly, she could identify which abandoned approaches had shown promise but had been rejected for political rather than technical reasons. Several concepts from the archives provided crucial insights that helped optimize the Shadowhawk's performance beyond what she could have achieved through independent development. The breakthrough discovery came when Maria accessed financial records that revealed the true cost of Project Phantom's development. Jake Morrison's team had spent over $200 million during the past 18 months, with projected total costs approaching the program's $800 million budget before any functional prototypes had been delivered. The waste was staggering, particularly when compared to the Shadowhawk's development cost of less than $50,000, including Maria's own labor. But the financial analysis also revealed something more sinister. Quantum dynamics was billing the Pentagon for research activities that were essentially repeating work that had been completed years earlier on previous projects. The company was getting paid multiple times to solve the same problems, while consistently failing to deliver working solutions that could be deployed operationally. It was a lucrative cycle of failure that benefited everyone, except the taxpayers funding the research and the military personnel who needed effective equipment. Maria documented these findings in encrypted files that she stored on personal devices, understanding that her investigation was moving into territory that could have serious legal implications if discovered. She wasn't stealing classified information for personal gain, but she was definitely accessing records that weren't intended for maintenance staff review. The ethical justification was that someone needed to understand and document the systematic waste of public resources that was occurring under cover of classified project classifications. Her access to the building's computer networks also provided real-time insight into Project Phantom's ongoing struggles. Maria could monitor Jake Morrison's team communications, review their test results, and observe their increasingly desperate attempts to solve fundamental design problems. The internal emails painted a picture of mounting panic as deadline after deadline slipped past without meaningful progress toward operational capability. Jake's communications with Dr. Elena Vasquez revealed the gap between public confidence and private desperation. In meetings with Pentagon officials, he projected unwavering optimism about eventual success and requested additional funding to pursue promising developments. In private emails, he acknowledged that the design approach was fundamentally flawed and would require complete restructuring to achieve basic performance targets. Dr. Vasquez's position was even more complicated. As program director, she was responsible for delivering results that satisfied Pentagon requirements while managing political pressures from quantum dynamics executive leadership. Her communications showed someone caught between competing demands that couldn't be reconciled using available resources and approved methodologies. She understood the technical problems clearly, but lacked the political authority to implement the radical changes that would be necessary to fix them. The most revealing communications involved discussions about managing the upcoming evaluation by General Robert Hayes. The leadership team was openly strategizing about how to present Project Phantom's capabilities in the most favorable light, while concealing its most obvious limitations. They planned to use carefully controlled demonstration conditions that would minimize the impact of known design flaws, while emphasizing theoretical potential rather than proven performance. This was exactly the kind of sophisticated deception that Maria had observed in corporate presentations throughout her career. Technical problems were reframed as development opportunities, timeline delays became evidence of ambitious scope, and cost overruns demonstrated commitment to achieving revolutionary capabilities. The language was carefully crafted to create impressions of progress while avoiding specific commitments that could be later evaluated objectively. Maria realized that General Hayes would likely see through these presentation techniques if he possessed sufficient technical background to evaluate Project Phantom's actual capabilities rather than its theoretical potential. But the demonstration would be structured to limit his ability to observe uncontrolled performance, and the supporting materials would emphasize computer simulations over real-world test results. The Shadowhawk project took on new urgency as Maria understood the scope of deception being prepared for the Pentagon evaluation. Her garage workshop contained proof that the problems plaguing Project Phantom could be solved using dramatically different approaches, but demonstrating this would require exposing herself to professional and legal risks that could destroy her life, even if she ultimately proved correct about superior solutions. Working in the basement archives, Maria developed a comprehensive analysis of quantum dynamics' historical pattern of technical failure and financial waste. The document was devastating in its implications, suggesting that the company had been systematically defrauding the Pentagon for over a decade while consistently failing to deliver operational capabilities that justified continued funding. More importantly, it demonstrated that practical solutions existed, but were being ignored in favor of approaches that generated greater revenue through extended development timelines. But Maria also understood that presenting this analysis through official channels would accomplish nothing except her immediate termination and possible criminal prosecution for accessing classified information without proper authorization. The FADI, same corporate culture that had rejected her technical proposal, would certainly reject accusations of systematic fraud, particularly when those accusations came from a janitor who had violated multiple policies to gather supporting evidence. The solution required a different approach entirely. Instead of challenging the system directly, Maria would demonstrate the superiority of alternative methods through undeniable practical results. The Shadowhawk's capabilities would speak louder than any written report, particularly if those capabilities could be demonstrated during the most critical evaluation in Project Phantom's history. Maria began planning an intervention that would forever change how the aerospace industry thought about innovation, hierarchy, and the sources of breakthrough technology. Her strategy was audacious beyond anything she'd ever attempted, requiring precise timing, flawless execution, and consequences that she couldn't fully predict. But the alternative was watching hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars continue to be wasted on approaches that she knew would never succeed. The basement archives contained building schematics that showed maintenance tunnels connecting different sections of the quantum dynamics facility. These passages had been constructed during the original building design to provide access for utility repairs and emergency evacuation, but they were rarely used and not monitored by security systems. Maria mapped routes that would allow her to move through the facility undetected, carrying equipment that would be essential for her planned demonstration. More importantly, the schematics revealed that the main testing facility where General Hayes would observe Project Phantom's capabilities was accessible through maintenance tunnels that terminated in utility rooms directly beneath the demonstration area. Maria could position herself and her equipment to monitor the official presentation while preparing her own counter-demonstration that would prove the superiority of alternative approaches. The technical challenge was adapting the Shadowhawk for operation in an environment where its capabilities would be directly compared to Project Phantom's performance. Maria redesigned several subsystems to ensure that her drone could operate flawlessly under the specific conditions that would exist during the Pentagon evaluation. She also developed remote piloting capabilities that would allow her to control the aircraft from concealed positions while maintaining perfect stealth characteristics. But the psychological challenge was even greater. Maria was preparing to deliberately sabotage a corporate presentation involving Pentagon officials, classified defense projects, and hundreds of millions of dollars in government contracts. If her intervention failed or was discovered before she could prove her points, the consequences would extend far beyond losing her janitorial position. She could face federal charges for interfering with defense contractor operations, accessing classified information without authorization, and possibly espionage if prosecutors decided to interpret her actions as foreign intelligence gathering. Yet the alternative was equally unacceptable. Maria possessed working solutions to critical national defense challenges, and those solutions were being ignored because of her position in the corporate hierarchy. Hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars were being wasted on approaches that she knew would fail, while military personnel were being denied access to technology that could save lives in combat situations. The decision crystallized during a particularly frustrating conversation that she overheard between Jake Morrison and David Park about managing General Hayes's expectations during the demonstration. They were openly discussing how to structure the presentation to minimize exposure of Project Phantom's most obvious flaws, while creating impressions of capability that couldn't be sustained under realistic operating conditions. Maria realized that someone needed to ensure that General Hayes received accurate information about the state of stealth drone technology, even if that information came from sources that the corporate hierarchy would prefer to suppress. Her intervention would provide the Pentagon with choices that they didn't know existed, while demonstrating that innovation could emerge from the most unexpected places when given the opportunity to prove itself. The woman they had dismissed as unqualified was about to provide the most qualified demonstration in the history of military aerospace technology. But first, she needed to complete preparations that would ensure her moment of truth was technically flawless, strategically devastating, and absolutely impossible to ignore or dismiss. In her garage workshop, the Shadowhawk underwent final modifications that would optimize its performance for the most important flight of Maria's career. Every component was tested and retested, every system verified and verified again, because she would have only one opportunity to prove that the future of stealth technology was hiding in the place that nobody had thought to look. The countdown to confrontation had begun, and Maria Santos was finally ready to step out of the shadows and claim her place among the engineers who had never imagined that genius could wear a maintenance uniform and carry a mop bucket. General Robert Hayes arrived at Quantum Dynamics Corporation at precisely 0800 hours on a crisp Tuesday morning in March, stepping out of a black government sedan with the bearing of someone who had spent 35 years evaluating military technology and could distinguish between genuine innovation and expensive theater. His entourage included 2 Pentagon procurement specialists, a congressional liaison, and Dr. Sarah Chun from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, all of whom carried briefcases filled with evaluation criteria that would determine the future of Project Phantom. Maria watched the arrival from her position in the basement maintenance area, monitoring security cameras through the building's internal network while making final adjustments to equipment that would soon change everything. She had spent the previous 72 hours in a state of controlled preparation, checking and rechecking every component of her plan, while fighting off waves of doubt about the wisdom of challenging the entire defense contracting establishment. The official demonstration was scheduled to begin at 1000 hours in the secure testing facility, a climate-controlled hangar where Project Phantom would supposedly prove its revolutionary capabilities under carefully managed conditions. Jake Morrison had spent weeks preparing for this moment, coordinating with Dr. Elena Vasquez and David Park to ensure that every aspect of the presentation would emphasize theoretical potential while minimizing the exposure of practical limitations. Maria's intervention was timed to coincide with the moment when Project Phantom's flaws would be most obvious to trained observers. She had studied the demonstration timeline extensively, identifying the precise moment when Jake's drone would be attempting its most challenging maneuver, a high-speed reconnaissance pass that required the kind of precision and reliability that his design simply couldn't deliver consistently. The morning briefing session provided Maria with her first opportunity to observe General Hayes in action. Through audio feeds from the conference room's cleaning staff communications system, she listened as Jake presented his latest projections for Project Phantom's capabilities. His confidence was impressive, backed by sophisticated computer animations that showed the drone performing impossible maneuvers while remaining completely invisible to enemy detection systems. But General Hayes's questions revealed the kind of technical knowledge that Jake hadn't anticipated. Instead of accepting broad claims about revolutionary performance, the general wanted specific data about radar cross-sections, operational endurance, maintenance requirements, and cost per mission. His inquiries probed exactly the areas where Project Phantom was most vulnerable, forcing Jake to rely increasingly on theoretical projections rather than proven test results. Mr. Morrison, General Hayes said during the pause in the presentation, "I'm seeing impressive simulations, but I need to understand real-world performance under adverse conditions. What happens when your drone encounters unexpected weather, electronic interference, or mechanical stress that wasn't anticipated in the design phase? Jake's response was a masterpiece of corporate evasion. General, those are exactly the kinds of challenges that our adaptive systems are designed to handle. The artificial intelligence algorithms learn from environmental variations and adjust performance parameters in real time. We're confident that field testing will validate the robustness of our approach. Maria shook her head while listening to this exchange. Jake was promising capabilities that his current design couldn't possibly deliver, while carefully avoiding specific commitments that could be evaluated objectively. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated deception that she had observed throughout her career in aerospace engineering, where impressive presentation substituted for genuine technical achievement. Dr. Sarah Chun from DARPA asked the question that Maria had been hoping someone would raise. I'm interested in comparing your approach to alternative design philosophies. Have you evaluated simpler architectures that might achieve similar results with lower complexity and cost? The silence that followed was telling. Jake clearly hadn't prepared for questions about fundamental design alternatives, because his entire career had been built on the assumption that more complexity automatically meant better performance. His eventual response revealed the cognitive blind spot that plagued the entire Project Phantom effort. Dr. Chun, the mission requirements demand capabilities that can only be achieved through cutting-edge technology integration. Simpler approaches might work for basic applications, but they can't deliver the revolutionary performance that next-generation warfare requires. Maria almost laughed at the irony. Jake was arguing that complex problems required complex solutions when her garage workshop contained proof that the opposite was true. The Shadowhawk achieved superior performance precisely because it embraced simplicity over sophistication, reliability over theoretical capability, and practical effectiveness over impressive demonstrations. The briefing session concluded with General Hayes requesting immediate access to the testing facility for hands-on evaluation of Project Phantom's actual capabilities. This was the moment that Jake had been dreading, when theoretical projections would meet practical reality under the scrutiny of observers who understood the difference between marketing presentations and operational effectiveness. Maria used the transition period to move through the maintenance tunnels toward her predetermined position beneath the testing facility. Her equipment was already in place, concealed in utility areas that provided perfect access to the demonstration space while remaining completely hidden from the official observers. The Shadowhawk waited in a storage room adjacent to the main hangar, powered up and ready for the flight that would rewrite the rules of military aerospace technology. The testing facility was an impressive space designed to showcase quantum dynamics' most advanced capabilities. Polished concrete floors reflected overhead lighting that illuminated Project Phantom's prototype drone, suspended from a precision mounting system. The aircraft looked formidable, its angular surfaces coated with radar-absorbing materials that had cost more than most people's houses. Banks of monitoring equipment surrounded the demonstration area, ready to record every aspect of performance for later analysis. Jake Morrison stood at the control station like a conductor preparing to lead a symphony, surrounded by computer screens displaying flight parameters, environmental conditions, and system status indicators. His team of engineers clustered nearby, their expressions mixing confidence with barely concealed anxiety about the performance they were about to deliver under the most critical evaluation of their careers. General Hayes and his entourage occupied the observation platform with clear sight, lines to both the drone and the control systems. Maria could see them through concealed cameras, noting the general's methodical approach to evaluating each component of the demonstration setup. His questions to the technical staff revealed Someone who understood aerospace engineering well enough to recognize both genuine innovation and sophisticated deception. "Before we begin the flight demonstration," General Hayes said, "I'd like to understand your approach to stealth technology. Can you explain how your design achieves radar invisibility compared to conventional aircraft?" Jake launched into a detailed explanation of Project Phantom's stealth characteristics, emphasizing the exotic materials and complex geometry that supposedly made the drone undetectable to enemy sensors. His presentation was technically accurate, but fundamentally misleading, focusing on individual components rather than overall system effectiveness. Maria knew that the real test would come when Project Phantom attempted to demonstrate its capabilities under realistic conditions. The controlled environment of the testing facility concealed most of the design's fundamental flaws, but careful observation would reveal performance limitations that Jake's presentation had carefully avoided mentioning. The flight demonstration began with basic maneuvers designed to showcase Project Phantom's handling characteristics and stability. The drone performed adequately during these simple tests, though Maria noticed slight vibrations and control irregularities that suggested underlying structural problems. Jake's commentary emphasized the smoothness of operation while glossing over the minor anomalies that trained observers could easily detect. But the real challenges began when Project Phantom attempted the advanced maneuvers that justified its enormous development cost. High-speed turns revealed control system lag that made precise navigation difficult. Rapid altitude changes exposed power management issues that limited operational endurance. Most damaging of all, the stealth system showed degraded performance. When the drone was maneuvering aggressively, exactly the conditions where radar invisibility would be most critical in combat situations. General Hayes observed these problems with the expression of someone who had seen similar demonstrations fail for identical reasons throughout his career. His questions became increasingly pointed as Project Phantom's limitations became apparent. Despite Jake's desperate attempts to emphasize positive aspects of the performance, "Mr. Morrison," the general said during a pause in the demonstration, "I'm seeing control response delays that would be problematic in combat situations. How does your design address the need for instantaneous maneuvering when facing enemy threats?" Jake's response revealed the desperation that Maria had observed building over months of failed attempts to solve fundamental design problems. "General, the current prototype is optimized for testing rather than operational deployment. The production version will incorporate improvements that address the minor issues you're observing today." It was exactly the kind of promise that defense contractors had been making for decades, requesting additional funding to solve problems that should have been addressed before requesting demonstration opportunities. General Hayes had clearly heard these excuses many times before, and his expression suggested that his patience was rapidly approaching its limits. The catastrophic failure occurred during Project Phantom's attempt to demonstrate its most advanced capability, a high-speed reconnaissance pass that required precise navigation while maintaining stealth characteristics. The drone was supposed to approach the target area undetected, gather intelligence using its sensor package, and withdraw without being observed by simulated enemy radar systems. Instead, Project Phantom's control systems became unstable during the high-speed approach, causing the drone to oscillate wildly before making an emergency landing that damaged several expensive components. The stealth systems failed completely during the maneuver, making the aircraft clearly visible to the monitoring equipment that was supposed to simulate enemy detection capabilities. The silence in the testing facility was deafening. Jake Morrison stared at his control screens with the expression of someone watching his career explode in real time. Dr. Elena Vasquez closed her eyes as if hoping that the demonstration would restart successfully when she opened them. David Park was already reaching for his phone, probably preparing to call corporate lawyers about liability issues. General Hayes broke the silence with a question that cut straight to the heart of Project Phantom's fundamental problems. "Mr. Morrison, help me understand something. You've just demonstrated a system failure that would be catastrophic in combat conditions. Why should the Pentagon continue funding development of technology that can't perform its basic mission reliably?" Jake's attempt to respond was interrupted by something that nobody in the testing facility had expected. A soft humming sound barely perceptible above the facility's air conditioning systems, followed by the appearance of an aircraft that seemed to materialize from empty air directly above the demonstration area. The Shadowhawk descended smoothly into the testing facility through the main hangar doors, which had been opened to provide ventilation during Project Phantom's failed demonstration. Maria's drone moved with the fluid precision of something that belonged in the air, its simple aluminum construction gleaming under the overhead lights as it executed maneuvers that Project Phantom had just failed to accomplish. The reaction was immediate and electric. General Hayes stepped forward to get a better view of the unexpected aircraft, while his entourage scrambled to understand how an unidentified drone had gained access to a secure testing facility. Jake Morrison's team stared in amazement as the Shadowhawk performed the exact reconnaissance mission that had just destroyed their prototype, completing every maneuver flawlessly, while remaining completely invisible to the radar systems that had easily detected Project Phantom's approach. But the most shocking moment came when the Shadowhawk settled gently onto the testing facility floor and Maria Santos emerged from the maintenance access tunnel, carrying the remote control unit that had guided the demonstration. Her blue maintenance uniform and worn work boots were a stark contrast to the high-tech environment, but her confident bearing left no doubt about who had been controlling the aircraft that had just outperformed $800 million of corporate engineering. The testing facility erupted in confused voices as everyone tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Security personnel moved toward Maria while General Hayes raised his hand to stop them, his expression showing the kind of fascination that career military officers reserve for genuinely revolutionary technology. "I'm Specialist Maria Santos," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the testing facility despite the chaos around her. "I'm a maintenance employee here at Quantum Dynamics, and I believe I can solve the problems you've been discussing." General Hayes studied Maria with the calculating gaze of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew about military technology development. Behind him, Jake Morrison was frantically trying to explain how a janitor had gained access to classified demonstration areas with unauthorized aircraft, while Dr. Elena Vasquez was staring at the Shadowhawk as if trying to understand how something so simple could outperform their sophisticated prototype. The moment that would change everything had finally arrived. The woman they had dismissed as irrelevant was standing in the center of the most important military technology evaluation of the year, with undeniable proof that innovation could emerge from the most unexpected places. But the real test was just beginning. Maria had proven that her approach worked, but now she needed to convince the most powerful figures in military procurement that the future of aerospace technology belonged to engineers who valued effectiveness over impressiveness, simplicity over sophistication, and results over credentials. The confrontation that would reshape the defense industry was about to begin, and Maria Santos was finally ready to claim her place among the engineers who had never imagined that genius could wear a maintenance uniform and emerge from the basement levels of corporate America. The silence stretched for exactly 14 seconds before General Robert Hayes spoke, his voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere of the testing facility like a precision instrument designed for clarity in chaos. "Miss Santos, I need you to explain exactly what I just witnessed, starting with how you gained access to this secure facility and ending with how your aircraft accomplished what an $800 million development program just failed to achieve." Maria stepped forward, her work boots clicking against the polished concrete floor as she approached the observation platform where the most powerful figures in military Procurement waited for answers that would reshape their understanding of aerospace innovation. Behind her, the Shadowhawk sat motionless on the testing floor. Its simple aluminum construction, a stark contrast to Project Phantom's exotic materials and complex geometry. General Hayes, my name is Maria Santos, and I'm a licensed aerospace engineer with 15 years of experience in military aircraft development. For the past 8 months, I've been employed as a maintenance worker at this facility, which has given me extensive access to Project Phantom's technical documentation and performance data. Dr. Elena Vasquez found her voice first, though it carried the tremor of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. This is highly irregular, General. Ms. Santos has violated multiple security protocols and accessed classified information without proper authorization. We should be calling security, not conducting impromptu technical evaluations. General Hayes raised his hand for silence. His attention focused entirely on Maria and the aircraft she had somehow conjured from the shadows of corporate invisibility. Dr. Vasquez, right now I'm less concerned with protocols than I am with understanding how your maintenance staff has apparently solved problems that your engineering team couldn't address with unlimited resources. Jake Morrison stepped forward, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from watching professional humiliation unfold in front of the most important audience of your career. General, this is some kind of stunt designed to undermine legitimate research and development. There's no way a janitor could have developed functional stealth technology in her spare time. Maria turned to face Jake directly, her expression carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. Mr. Morrison, would you like me to explain why your approach to radar cross-section reduction is fundamentally flawed? Or would you prefer to continue believing that expensive materials can substitute for intelligent design principles? The challenge hung in the air like an explosive waiting for someone to light the fuse. Jake's response revealed the depth of his technical insecurity beneath the polished presentation skills that had carried him through years of corporate success. You're talking about highly classified research that you had no authorization to access. Your presence here is illegal, and your claims about superior technology are obviously fabricated to create some kind of media spectacle. General Hayes stepped between them before the confrontation could escalate further, but his intervention revealed which side of the argument had captured his attention. Mr. Morrison, the aircraft sitting on this floor just demonstrated capabilities that your prototype couldn't achieve. I'm willing to listen to explanations from anyone who can help me understand what I'm seeing. Maria pulled a tablet computer from her maintenance bag, its screen displaying technical specifications that would have impressed Pentagon engineers despite being prepared in a converted garage workshop. General, the fundamental problem with Project Phantom's design is that it tries to achieve stealth through brute force application of expensive materials rather than intelligent geometric principles that deflect radar energy efficiently. She clicked through a series of diagrams that showed radar wave interactions with different aircraft shapes, her presentation lacking the polish of corporate marketing materials, but containing the kind of practical insight that came from actually solving problems rather than just talking about them. The Shadowhawk uses angular surfaces and strategic placement of reflective elements to guide radar signals away from their source, achieving superior stealth characteristics using ordinary aluminum instead of exotic composites. Dr. Sarah Chun from DARPA leaned forward with the expression of someone who had spent years evaluating technical claims and could recognize genuine innovation when it appeared. Ms. Santos, you're describing design principles that have been understood theoretically for decades. Why hasn't anyone implemented them in practical aircraft? Maria's smile carried a hint of the frustration she had experienced throughout her months at Quantum Dynamics, watching brilliant people fail to apply basic physics principles because they conflicted with corporate preferences for expensive complexity. Dr. Chen, The principles have been available in academic literature since the 1990s, but defense contractors have financial incentives to pursue approaches that require extensive development, timelines, and exotic materials procurement. The implication was clear and devastating. Quantum Dynamics and similar companies made more money from extended development programs than from delivering working solutions quickly and economically. Project Phantom's $800 million budget represented profitable failure rather than the kind of efficient success that Maria had achieved with minimal resources. Jake Morrison's desperation became increasingly obvious as he realized that his entire career was being dismantled by someone he had never bothered to notice. During 8 months of shared proximity, "General, you can't seriously be considering technical advice from someone who cleans our bathrooms. This woman has no credentials, no security clearance, and no authority to be making recommendations about classified defense projects." General Hayes turned to face Jake with the expression of someone who had spent 35 years dealing with defense contractors who confused expensive presentations with actual capability. "Mr. Morrison, the person standing in front of me, just demonstrated technology that outperforms everything your team has produced, despite having access to a fraction of your resources. Right now I'm more interested in her credentials than I am in yours." Maria understood that this was her moment to prove that innovation belonged to those who could deliver results, rather than those who could deliver impressive promises. "General Hayes, everything I've shown you today was developed using commercially available components and design principles that have been published in aerospace engineering textbooks for decades. The total development cost was approximately $47,000, including my labor time. The financial comparison was staggering. Project Phantom had consumed over $200 million while failing to achieve basic mission requirements, while the Shadowhawk had demonstrated superior capabilities using less than 0.1% of that budget. The implications for Pentagon procurement policies were enormous and potentially embarrassing for everyone who had approved continued funding for obviously failing approaches. But General Hayes seemed more interested in practical solutions than in protecting institutional reputations. "Ms. Santos, I need you to walk me through your aircraft-specific capabilities and limitations. Can it perform extended reconnaissance missions under adverse weather conditions?" Maria activated the Shadowhawk systems remotely, its nearly silent electric motors spinning up while sensor arrays deployed with precision that Project Phantom's mechanical systems couldn't match. "General, this aircraft can operate continuously for 8 hours while carrying full sensor payloads, maintain stable flight in winds up to 40 miles per hour, and function reliably in temperature ranges from -20 to +120 degrees Fahrenheit." She clicked through performance data that she had gathered during dozens of test flights at the abandoned airfield outside Austin, numbers that represented real-world capability rather than theoretical projections. The stealth characteristics remain effective during all flight regimes, including the aggressive maneuvering that just caused Project Phantom systems to fail. Dr. Elena Vasquez made one final attempt to salvage her program's credibility, though her voice carried the hollow tone of someone who knew the battle was already lost. "General, even if Ms. Santos has achieved some limited technical success, she's working outside proper oversight and safety protocols. We can't recommend deployment of technology that hasn't been subjected to rigorous testing and evaluation." Maria's response revealed the depth of preparation that had gone into her intervention. From her maintenance bag, she produced a thick folder containing test results, performance analyses, and safety evaluations that would have satisfied any Pentagon review board. "Dr. Vasquez, I've conducted over 200 test flights under various conditions, documented every system failure and improvement, and maintained safety standards that exceed military requirements for experimental aircraft." General Hayes accepted the folder and began reviewing the documentation with the methodical attention of someone who understood the difference between genuine engineering data and corporate marketing materials. What he found there would later be described as the most comprehensive independent aircraft development program that Pentagon officials had ever encountered. The technical data was flawless, but more importantly, it demonstrated the kind of practical, problem-solving approach that military operations actually required. Maria had tested her aircraft under realistic conditions rather than controlled laboratory environments, identified and corrected real-world performance issues rather than optimizing for impressive demonstrations, and focused on operational reliability rather than theoretical capabilities. Ms. Santos, General Hayes said after reviewing several pages of test data, "This documentation suggests that you've essentially completed a full aircraft development program using resources that most contractors would spend on preliminary design studies. How is that possible?" Maria's answer revealed the fundamental difference between corporate engineering and practical innovation. General, when you're working with limited resources, you learn to solve problems efficiently rather than expensively. Every component had to work perfectly because I couldn't afford backup systems or redundant capabilities. The constraints that had seemed like disadvantages had actually forced Maria to develop more elegant solutions than teams with unlimited budgets ever achieved. She had innovated through necessity rather than specification, creating technology that worked reliably because it had to rather than because it impressed review boards. Jake Morrison made one desperate attempt to salvage his position, though. His arguments revealed how completely he had missed the significance of what was happening around him. "General, we can't abandon years of development work based on one unauthorized demonstration. Project Phantom represents cutting-edge technology that will maintain American superiority in aerospace systems for decades." General Hayes closed Maria's technical folder and fixed Jake with the kind of stare that had ended many military careers over the years. "Mr. Morrison, the technology sitting on this floor has just demonstrated superiority over everything your team has produced. Unless you can explain why the Pentagon should continue funding approaches that have been proven inferior, this conversation is over." The corporate hierarchy that had dismissed Maria for 8 months was collapsing in real time as practical results trumped political positioning. Dr. Alada Vasquez understood the implications clearly enough to begin damage control efforts that might salvage some fraction of quantum dynamics' reputation from the wreckage of Project Phantom. "General Hayes, if Ms. Santos has indeed developed superior technology, quantum dynamics would be interested in incorporating her innovations into our development programs. We could offer her a senior engineering position with appropriate security, clearances and resources to optimize her designs for production deployment." Maria's laugh was soft but carried enough edge to slice through corporate condescension like a precision instrument. "Dr. Vasquez, I submitted a technical proposal through your innovation portal 8 months ago and was told that maintenance staff weren't qualified to contribute ideas above their station. Now you're interested in my innovations?" The offer revealed everything wrong with corporate culture at defense contractors like Quantum Dynamics. They were willing to embrace innovation only after it had been proven successful by someone working outside their system, but they had no interest in nurturing that innovation when it emerged from unexpected sources within their own organization. General Hayes understood the implications perfectly. "Dr. Vasquez, it sounds like your company had access to this technology for months, but chose to ignore it because of institutional biases about where innovation can originate. That's exactly the kind of thinking that wastes taxpayer money on inferior solutions." The conversation that followed would reshape Pentagon procurement policies for years to come. General Hayes recommended immediate termination of Project Phantom's funding, transfer of its remaining budget to independent development of Maria's technologies, and comprehensive review of defense contractor selection criteria that had consistently favored expensive complexity over practical effectiveness. Maria found herself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond her personal vindication. The Shadow Hawk project became the foundation for a new approach to military technology development that emphasized proven results over impressive presentations, cost-effectiveness over exotic materials, and innovative thinking over institutional credentials. 6 months later, Maria Santos stood in the Pentagon briefing room where she had once been dismissed as irrelevant, addressing senior military leadership about the future of aerospace technology. Her presentation emphasized principles that had been forgotten during decades of corporate-dominated development: elegant simplicity, practical reliability, and the understanding that the best solutions often came from unexpected sources. The Shadow Hawk had evolved into a production program that delivered superior reconnaissance capabilities at a fraction of traditional costs, while Project Phantom's expensive components were being sold as scrap metal. Jake Morrison had left quantum dynamics to pursue opportunities in civilian aerospace, where his presentation skills were more valued than his engineering judgment. Dr. Elena Vasquez remained at Quantum Dynamics, now serving as Director of Practical Innovation Programs, that actively sought input from employees regardless of their position in the corporate hierarchy. She had learned that genius wore many different uniforms and often emerged from the places that traditional institutions overlooked. But the most significant change was cultural rather than technical. Military procurement officials began evaluating defense contractors based on their ability to deliver working solutions rather than impressive promises, while engineering schools started teaching courses about innovation that emphasized practical problem-solving over theoretical complexity. Maria's story became required reading at the Pentagon, a reminder that breakthrough technology could emerge from anywhere when brilliant people were given the opportunity to prove themselves. Her basement workshop was preserved as an inspiration to future engineers who might find themselves dismissed by institutions that confused credentials with capability. The woman they had ignored had built more than a stealth drone in her garage. She had constructed a new understanding of where innovation truly originated and why the most profound discoveries often came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes, the person everyone overlooked was exactly the person everyone needed, and sometimes the courage to step out of the shadows was the most revolutionary act of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.